It's an absolute pleasure to welcome back to the programme the legendary Alice Cooper. How are you?
I am great. I'm in 2 bands now. I wasn't expecting to be in 2 bands at 75, but both bands are really high-power bands. And the unique thing about being in both bands is that in one band, I play Alice Cooper. At the other band, I'm the lead singer.
Yeah.
So it's kind of going back to our bar days, going back to the bar, but for everybody. And at the same time, both bands, everybody in both bands are best friends.
Yeah.
So we've been together 8 years, the Vampires. There's never been one argument in that band. It's crazy. Nobody wants to argue about anything, which, okay, let's do it, And in my band, the reason I made this band called The Road was because I wanted to show them off. Here's a band that doesn't argue. They just get up, they do their job. And every night, they're fairly spotless every night. And they give me everything they've got. And I said, I really want to feature this band then on a record. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to write an album about the road, because that's where we all know each other from. You guys all bring in songs about different aspects of the road. Bob Ezrin and I will do an operation on them and turn them into Alice Cooper songs. And I want to do them live in the studio. I don't want to do layers. I don't want to put bass and drums over.
And I mean, there was no fancy trickery and no overdubs. You just went in there and played,
Everybody went in and played.
Yeah.
And then, and there was like a few overdubs there. I'm not going to say we did it totally live, because, might say, hey, that bass line, let's do that bass line again. Or that could be a better guitar solo. But I'd say 90% of the album was live in the studio.
Road is your 22nd Alice Cooper album. And, being on the road, and life on the road as you head from city to city and town to town and venue to venue, it's not everybody that can handle it, but you've been doing it since you were 15 years of age. How can you handle it? What do you enjoy about touring so much?
It's just a state of mind. You understand what the road's going to be. You navigate it, especially now that you're sober. My wife and I have the same kind of brainwaves on this. We look at being on the road as being on a big vacation. But, during the day, I get up, I might play golf, or we get up and we go shopping. I never sit in the hotel room, ever. And
you played golf this morning. You were out at Loch Lomond, weren't you?
Yeah, played at Loch Lomond.
How did you do?
4 birdies, thank you. And it's first, I've only played on this tour 3 times because it's just been too hectic. But it's a different way of approaching your day. Everything depends on that last 2 hours of the day, the show. And everybody knows that in both bands. That doesn't matter what they do during the day, be ready for that show. And I know how I do that. I make sure that there's a rest period of time. I did this way back a long time ago, though, an hour and a half. Even if you don't take a nap, just lay down in a dark room. And that's kind of plugging you back into the wall, and getting you recharged. And then when you go out to do the show, you really believe in this show, and you give it everything you have.
One of my favourite songs from the new album, which once again is called Road, is a track called All Over the World. And you talk about losing your tour pass in Paris and waking up in the train, and you talk about going to jail in Hong Kong. Of all the touring that you've done over the years, have there been any moments where you've thought, is this actually happening to me? I mean, what kind of tight spots have you got into over the years?
Not really tight spots, but things that were so surrealistically crazy. Sao Paulo, Brazil. We played the very first rock concert in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And they had no idea what a rock concert looked like. So they have a place there that's about 10 times bigger than Madison Square Garden. And we did 158,000 people indoors. Indoors. That's the Guinness Book of Records for the biggest indoor audience. That's a city. Indoors. If they all go at the same time, it's like a nuclear bomb going off inside. Okay, there's 158,000 drunk, stoned Brazilians at the top of their lungs. Our amps were the size of these walls. I mean, and I couldn't hear one thing that was going on. It was so loud in there. And then the very funny thing about it was about 80% of people below the equator believe in Macumba, which is a little bit Catholicism, a little bit voodoo, a little bit this and that, and all mixed together. So here I am on stage, and I've got the makeup on. I have a giant snake around me. This is the picture in the paper the next day. And all it says is Macumba. It should have said Baptist.
Let's hear the track now then. From his brand new album, this is my special guest, Alice Cooper and his band, and a great new song called All Over the World. This is Billy Sloan on BBC Radio Scotland. You join me in conversation with my special guest, Alice Cooper. And let's go back to the very beginning, Alice, because Bruce Springsteen once famously said that in his career he'd written a whole load of songs about, putting on the working jacket and going out in the morning and going to work. But it was something that he's never ever done. He's never had a proper job. And you were exactly the same, because when you were 15 years of age, you started playing in bands and you've never known anything else.
That was it. I've always been the lead singer in a band all my life. And luckily it was with the original guys.
And I mean, did you have ambitions to go and make a career doing something else?
I would have probably been an art major of some sort, because I was an art major and I was a journalism major also. So I understood the press and I understood art. And it just, when the band started playing, Dennis Dunaway, our bass player, was also an art student and journalism student. John Spear, our original drummer, was that. It was automatic that theatrics happened in the show. It was just natural for us just to go, well, put that on stage. The very first Earwigs show in front of the Letterman's Club with fake Beatle wigs on, parodying the Beatles in our track outfits, because we were all on track and cross country. There was a guillotine on stage. And there was a guy in a coffin that popped out. For some reason, we thought that was a funny idea. I mean, was that a foreshadowing of what was going to happen? That was, to us, a great idea. That was the very first moment I was ever on a stage. There was a guillotine and a coffin up there. Later, it found its way back in the show.
And of course, it's very well known that you're the son of a pastor, and your father once said, I know that what you're doing is not satanic.
Yeah.
He says, I get what you do. He said that, he had no problem at all with the theatricality. It was the lifestyle that he had a problem with. Do you remember the first time, when you got famous and you started having hit records and the shows get bigger and bigger, that you actually physically took your mum and dad to see Alice Cooper in all his glory up there on that stage? What was their reaction?
One of the things that sort of got my dad in trouble was that the night that they came to see us, it was in Omaha, Nebraska. Somehow, I don't know why they were there. It was the very same night that Rolling Stone magazine was traveling with us. And of course, Rolling Stone was after the groupies in the back seat of the limousine and this and that. And there's my mom and dad, who were just innocently watching this whole thing go down. And, I told my mom and dad, I said, this is all part of the facade of being a rock star. People want rock stars to have this lifestyle, extravagance. They want the hope of debauchery. They wanted us to do it for them because they were working in cubicles. So the rock stars had to be in trouble all the time.
And what did your mum and dad say to you when you come off stage? Did they say, we love the show, son, or what on earth were you doing?
Well, the funny thing was, no, they weren't. They saw what I was doing on stage, and they realized, like I said, there was nothing satanic about it, and it was just a big, extravagant hell's a poppin', and it was interpreted so many different ways. There was no internet then, so everybody interpreted the show the way they saw it. I would read reviews, or there would be 3 things in the review that never happened in the show. But the reviewer was just as much a victim of creating his own show as anybody else was.
Yeah, the mythology just grew and grew, didn't it?
It just grew. And, and so we didn't have to do 50% of the things we were accused of, but people saw it and they just went, oh, this and this. But my dad saw it, my mom saw it, and they saw us when we were rehearsing in the garage. It's the same band, just with a lot more stuff.
But it's very well known that you really embraced the whole rock and roll lifestyle, particularly when you started having hit records and the audiences get bigger and bigger.
Oh yeah,
and you embraced.
We didn't fight it.
You embraced alcohol in a big way, and you have said that you were not a drunk. You were more like a kind of lovable Dean Martin drunk, or maybe Dudley Moore in the movie Arthur.
Absolutely.
Now I saw you last night on stage at the Hydro in Glasgow. With the Hollywood Vampires with Johnny Depp and Joe Perry, and you were celebrating all the people that we have lost, like Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix and Keith Moon. And
I have fond memories of these people.
Yeah.
But I was not surprised when Jim Morrison died. I really liked Jim. Jim was really such a great artist. Everything about their albums was great. The Doors were one of the most creative bands ever because they had to follow Jim. Here's these three guys that Jim would go off on a tangent on this is the end or when the music's over, and they would just follow him. They never knew where he was going with this, but musically they'd follow him. I always thought that was really one of the most amazing things ever, how this band could do that, And same with Jimi Hendrix. We were in the golden age of real geniuses, but they were all extremely self-destructive. Everybody thought, well, I'll live through this. I can live through this.
But it could have happened to you because there was a moment in your life where you woke up one morning and you were vomiting blood.
Yeah.
And your wife, Cheryl, took one look at you and she says, right, okay, the party's over. What was the kind of, apart from wanting to stay alive, what was the incentive to not following the path of Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin, people like that? Because you could have ended up just another name on that long list of
easily.
Rock and roll casualties.
Yeah, I mean, I was destined for that 27-year-old. Luckily, I got married at 27.
Because you say in the song, Dead Don't Dance, if I wasn't in a band, I'd probably be a criminal. Or you'd be drinking all day. So, you really had to stop because, you gave it up in 1983. And we probably wouldn't be sitting here talking at the moment, would we?
No, I was in a very dangerous zone because I didn't know when to stop. And to me, everybody had a formula for how their success worked. And I didn't realize this till later when I had to actually use it on somebody else. I'd say, hey, I'm drinking and I'm making hit records and I'm never missing a show and I can do television and make Johnny Carson laugh and I can do all this stuff. And the drinking is just part of my formula. Internally, it was killing me though. I wasn't sick, but it was doing its magic with my pancreas, with everything else going on there. The doctor said if you would have had hangovers, it would have been the best thing ever for you. But you have to be sober to have a hangover. And I never got sober. I just stayed on this golden buzz. I'd wake up in the morning, have a beer, and I was, okay, going. I was going. But I never saw the problem until the middle of the Welcome to My Nightmare show, when alcohol became not alcohol, it became medicine. It became my way of dealing with the press. I had 8 interviews to do and then a show that night. So I would sit and I'd sip whiskey and Coke, probably with you, back in those days. And it worked, and it worked, and it worked, and it worked till the middle of the Nightmare tour, which was the most exhausting tour ever because that show was just exhausting. I'd get ready to go look at the show and I'd look at my costume. It was not fun then. It was the first time it wasn't fun. And I just put it up to the fact of too much touring. It was the alcohol that was, I knew I had to drink in order to put that costume on and put that makeup on. And that combination and that, I guess it was more of a ritual. I saw myself dying a little bit every night on stage. And I didn't see an end to it.
Well, you have now been sober since 1983, and I commend you on that.
40 years.
I think that's a greater achievement than any of the incredible hit records you've had.
But that's not a hard achievement for God.
Yeah.
For me, it was, he just basically took it away from me because I woke up one morning and it was gone.
Let's have another track from the album, and I was surprised to find this at the very end of the record. It's one of my all-time favourite songs from his brand new album. This is Alice Cooper from The Record Road, and a great cover of The Who's Magic Bus. This is Billy Sloan on BBC Radio Scotland. I'm delighted to be sitting in the studio with my special guest, Alice Cooper. And over the years, there's been a lot of humour in what you do. You would have to have a laugh
Everything.
at some of the...
Everything has a punchline somewhere in my show.
and one of the standout moments, I guess, would be way back in 1992 when you were asked completely out of the blue to take part in the movie Wayne's World alongside Mike Myers and Dana Carver.
Yep.
And you turned up and they gave you something like 8 pages of script and said, well, we start filming in 30 minutes. Just kind of tee that up for us. How mad was it? Because it looks absolutely crazy when you see it on film.
I loved the bit on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
It was a great bit. Because these two guys, I knew these guys. I've met these guys before, you know. And they were so good at these two characters. In fact, Garth, I thought, was taken as Glenn Buxton. Glenn Buxton was exactly Garth, except that he didn't play drums, he played guitar. I kept looking at him, he looked exactly like Glenn. He acted like Glenn. And I thought, I even asked Mike, I said, did you pattern him after our guitar player? And he said, no. I said, he's right on. He's absolutely on. But as soon as I got there, they just wanted us to do the song.
Yeah.
Feed My Frankenstein. And because I had that status of we're not worthy status, you know, they knew I was an actor also.
Yeah.
But I wasn't expecting any dialogue. So when I got there, you know, he says, here's a little bit of dialogue. And I went, okay. And there's all this stuff about socialist, governors and things. And I got into the middle of it, and I realized I couldn't memorize it, so I just start making things up.
Yeah, you just improvised it, and it was a kind of the ultimate history lesson in Milwaukee, wasn't it?
Yeah, and what you couldn't see was Mike and Dana here on the floor with the We're Not Worthy, doing everything they could to make me laugh. So I found a point right in the middle of them, and I did that whole dialogue to that point, and they were just kind of here. If you would have heard the We're Not Worthy, the length of it, it went on another 10 minutes, and it got vile. It got, I mean, if anybody ever found out that tape, they must have had it destroyed, because it really got vile. As
we are recording you, I've got you to say it, so we've got it on tape. How do you pronounce Milwaukee?
It's Milwaukee, and it is Algonquin for the good land. I love the fact that everybody in the band with all the tattoos were all like Jeopardy.
Yeah.
My guitar player's going, isn't that Algonquin for the good land? Why, yes, it is, Pete.
And I mean, when you're out and about, travelling around the world, whether socially or whether you're working, do you get people coming up to you in airports and shops and in the middle of, Fifth Avenue in New York and dropping to their knees and saying, we are not worthy? Has that actually happened to you?
Only 3 times a day when I'm in an airport. And you can see them coming. And they're looking at each other and go, are you ready? Are you ready? And I'm going, oh, there we go. And then when they do it, of course, I put my hand out. Kiss the ring. And I try to pretend like nobody's ever done it before. Oh, that's great. Well, that's very funny.
And I mean, you're a big music fan yourself. You were a big fan of the Beatles and the Stones and the Yardbirds and people like that. I mean, have you had We Are Not Worthy moments where you've come face to face with either a famous rock star that you've admired, or a movie star, or a politician, or a sporting hero, and you've almost done a We Are Not Worthy yourself? You've been so taken aback by who's been standing in front of you.
So many, so many.
Like who?
Because Groucho Marx came to the show, and he wanted to see what all this talk was about this show. And he saw it as vaudeville.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a dark vaudeville, rock and roll dark vaudeville, if you really want to look at it. And he started bringing like Mae West, Fred Astaire, Jack Benny, George Burns. They're on the side of the stage watching the show. The audience is freaked out totally by what we're doing. And these guys are... Gracie Allen and I used to do an act in 1923 in Toledo with a guy with a guillotine. They were not shocked in the least bit. They'd seen it all, right? But we're looking on the side, and I'm going, it's Jack Benny. That's Fred. My dancers are going, that's Fred Astaire. You know, and he comes back and says, your dancers are great. And of course, the dancers are just going, he just said we were great. No. And when Salvador Dali saw the show, it was surrealism. You know, and Dali took credit for everything. So he says, it's surrealism, and it's based on me, you know. And we went, well, of course it is.
Let's have another track from the album, and it's a song that really does encapsulate your sense of humour. From the album Road, this is my special guest, Alice Cooper, and a great new track called Big Boots. This is Billy Sloan on BBC Radio Scotland. You join me with my special guest, Alice Cooper. We're talking about his great new album, which is his 22nd studio release, and it's a great new record called Road. And we've been talking about, you know, the different projects you get involved in. And one of my favourites happened fairly recently, Alice, and it was in 2018 when NBC Television did a kind of concert production of Jesus Christ Superstar with John Legend as the star of the show in the role of Jesus Christ. Yeah. And you were brilliantly cast as King Herod. It was a role that could almost have been written for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Mr. Rice did that. He's always been a real friend of ours, you know. And Tim was. I actually did it on a remake of the original cast album, playing Herod. And so when this came along, they said, "Well, who's going to play Herod?" And he says, "Alice Cooper." You know, and it was tell him, you know, because Herod was always a roly-poly kind of idiot, you know, because he was being run by the Roman, so he was just a face king. They said, "How would you play this?" I said, "Well, first of all, I would play it as an arrogant villain, as an arrogant, condescending. This is all about me, not about him, about Jesus Christ." And everybody loved that idea. There was 3 months of rehearsal, I think. I was only there for 3 days of rehearsal because I was on tour. So I'd come in, and they would block out the scene. And I'd go, okay. And then I had to go back on tour. And I'd come back in a week later, and we would rehearse the scene. But you only got to do it once. You had one shot at it. It's international, global television, one shot. And there's Andrew and Tim Rice. Right there, you know. And one thing that they kind of said to me before the show, they said, "You're probably the only one that works in front of an audience every night without a net."
Yeah.
You know, and I said, yeah.
Yeah, you got to deliver immortal lines like "Prove to me that you're divine, turn my water into wine." Now, the main theatre critic, the chief theatre critic of the LA Times said that it was perfect in a campy, dramatic and evil billion-dollar babies kind of way. You can't get higher praise than that.
I was kind of playing Alice in this whole thing. And yet it bothered me a little bit because I'm Christian.
Of course.
And there's John Legend, you know, on his knees. And the attitude of this was when he walks out, he sees the multitude. He doesn't even notice Jesus until he goes, "Oh, him." You know, in other words, he was minor to him. This was about his ego. And then we did one thing during the actual shot that made them all laugh. You know, I'm walking by, I am your king. He is not your king. I am your king. And I'm slapping hands. And one guy comes up and he slaps my hand. And I go, kind of wiped it off.
Let's have a little listen to Alice Cooper as King Herod right now.
Jesus, I am overjoyed to meet you.
Alice, your latest single from the album Road is a song called I'm Alice, and it's probably your most autobiographical lyric for a long, long time, because you say, "Let me make it clear, I'm your creation." And you constantly talk in interviews and in the song about Alice Cooper in the third person. I mean, you know, can you ever really be Vincent Damon Furnier, this guy who was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1948, or are you just always Alice Cooper, whether you like it or not?
I mean, you're talking to Vincent right now.
Yeah.
You know, I write the songs for Alice. Alice's attitude, how does he see this? And Bob Ezrin and I always talk about Alice in the third person. Alice wouldn't say that. You know, let's change that lyric. Alice would never say that. I'd say that. But Alice would never say that. He would never wear that. Alice, that doesn't work at all for Alice. It's easier to write for a character. I don't write Bob Dylan lyrics because Bob Dylan's talking about how he feels about things. I'm talking about how Alice feels about things. And so this is not me talking about me. This is Alice talking about himself. And he's an overblown, arrogant villain. So he's saying, and then I disappear. In other words, you're so lucky to be here and see me, but I have to explain to people that's Alice talking. That's not me.
Let's hear the song now then. From his brand new album, which is called Road, this is my special guest, Alice Cooper, and a song called quite simply, I'm Alice. Billy Sloan on BBC Radio Scotland. You join me with my special guest, Alice Cooper. We saw you last night, Alice, at the Hydro in Glasgow with your band, the Hollywood Vampires, and you kick off your Too Close for Comfort tour of America on the 5th of August. And without giving the game away too much, I believe that you have kind of sidelined both the guillotine and the gallows, and you now have a 12-foot Frankenstein monster that you're going to unleash on an unsuspecting public. What's happening with the tour? What's it going to be like?
Oh, they still cut my head off. Yeah, there has to be an end to every villain in every story. I think any novel, any book, any movie you see is only as good as its villain. And, Star Wars would have been nothing without Darth.
Yeah.
He was the guy. And so you have to end Alice's life on stage, right? The guillotine is so effective, but this year, the one cutting my head off is the funny part. He's already done what he has to do. He turns around, and there's Marie Antoinette.
Played by your wife.
Yeah, and she's the French outfit, except she has white eyes. She has a huge slit in her throat, and she's pretty much the ghost of, or the zombie of Marie Antoinette. And she just leads me to the guillotine, looks at the audience, of course, gracefully, and pulling. I don't think we can get rid of the guillotine. I don't think we can get rid of the hanging, because any other death for Alice, we've tried it. It has to be something that, a hanging, you can't do electric. It takes too long.
Yeah.
It's got to be something that's immediate, and those are the two classic things.
And once you complete the American tour, we're going to see the Too Close for Comfort show here in the UK, particularly in Scotland.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We'll be over probably next summer. We're doing America this year. And then next year, from what I understand, we're doing Australia, South America. We always do Europe. Europe is huge for us. And, we feel right at home here with a brand new show.
2023 is the 50th anniversary of your 6th and landmark album called $1 Billion Babies. Of course, some of the great songs on it are things like Elected and No More Mr. Nice Guy and Hello Hooray. And it's going to be repackaged and it's going to be released all around the country. With the benefit of 5 decades of hindsight, what do you think the 75-year-old Alice Cooper would have said to the 25-year-old guy who made that record way back in 1973?
Well, that Alice there were two Alices. The first Alice, say like on that picture down there, was the whipping boy. He was everything that was wrong with society. Every kid that didn't fit in with the other kids, that was my audience. We were not the Crosby, Stills, and Nash audience. We brought something different to it, and all of these kids that didn't fit in went, finally, a representative for us. I was this thing that her parents hated. I was this thing that just didn't care, and it was outrageous. But the songs were good. If you didn't have those songs, it's just a puppet show. And
do you think that the 25-year-old Alice could have envisaged, even in his wildest dreams, that he would be still doing this 50 years later?
Oh my gosh, never. When I turned 30, my manager got me a wheelchair. Because we didn't look past 30. Nobody saw it. But of course, that was spearheaded by the Stones. I kind of looked at the Stones and went, well, if Mick can keep doing this, if I'm in good shape and the audiences keep coming, and I can keep writing good songs and making good albums and doing great shows, why wouldn't I do that. I can't think of anything I'd rather do, you know. But once I got sober, this Alice that was sort of the hunched over alcoholic society's, just kicked him around, and then they hung him at the end. This Alice, when I became sober, was going to be a different Alice. I couldn't play that one anymore because I didn't feel like that anymore. I said, I want this Alice to be really in their face and really dangerous now, you know.
As always, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. We're glad to have you back in the programme, and we're going to play out now with the title track of that incredible album from 1973, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. And it was a collaboration between yourself and one of Scotland's favourite musical sons, Donovan. How did your paths cross? How did Donovan end up singing on an Alice Cooper record at the peak of your fame and notoriety?
We were in Morgan Studios, and Harry Nilsson was there, and T-Rex was there, and Ringo, and everybody was in the other studio. And we did the track of Billion Dollar Babies with me singing in it. We wanted something else on it. And somebody said, like, I go dancing nightly in the attic. And they said, well, Donovan's in the next studio. And I went, oh, yeah. And I went over and I said, Donovan, I said, you need to be on a hard rock record. You know, and he came in and nailed it. Everybody was laughing because it was so perfect, you know. And to this day, every time I see him, we kind of do that together. We do that little bit together. And but he was so perfect for it. And I really admired him from kind of jumping out of his world into my world and nailing it, you know.
Alice, it's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you and the band back in Scotland in 2024 with your Too Close for Comfort tour. And we close now with one of the most unlikely musical collaborations of all time. In the red corner, Donovan from Glasgow. In the blue corner, Alice Cooper from Detroit. And this is Billion Dollar Babies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The one and the only Alice Cooper.